My name is Dan Johnson, and I'm going to be a graduate of Ohio Christian University in the next few weeks. For my final class, I have been assigned the task of presenting my thoughts concerning the psychological approach to counseling known as acceptance and commitment therapy, better known as ACT. It is this approach more than any other that I will be presenting to my clients when I become a licensed chemical dependency counseling assistant in the state of Ohio. I want to first explain why acceptance and commitment therapy is so personally meaningful to me. I was born with a rare neurological disorder called Tourette's syndrome. The increased dopamine my brain produces causes me to experience uncontrollable tics, twitches, and even verbal noises for most of my life. Of course, this disrupted every aspect of my life, including relationships, disqualifying me to join the Air Force like my father, and closed a lot of doors that would have otherwise been open for me. I attempted to go to college right out of high school, like most other students, but my disability prevented me from being able to finish. For nearly 15 years, I struggled with my symptoms of Tourette's syndrome until I finally realized that the less I tried to control or even reduce my symptoms, the fewer my symptoms became. The answer was not to be found in control, but in acceptance of myself and my symptoms. This personal discovery changed my entire life and allowed me to get married, attain much better jobs, have a child, and even, finally, very soon, graduate from college. I was no longer a slave to my unhelpful actions and thoughts, and I felt free for the first time since a small child before my symptoms began. While taking a social psychology course I attended at Ohio Christian University, I came across a two-sentence reference to the counterintuitive psychological approach of acceptance and commitment therapy that taught clients to not fight against their troubling thoughts, but to accept them instead. I instantly made the connection that this was the approach for me and my eventual clients, and I would like to explain the core principles of what makes ACT such an effective approach for troubling thoughts, feelings, and actions. ACT was developed by Stephen C. Hayes and his research team at the University of Las Vegas over 30 years ago. ACT emerged from cognitive behavioral therapy, which owes its roots to behavioral therapy. Thus, ACT is often considered the third wave or manifestation of the behavioral approach. ACT is counterintuitively intuitive because it does not seek to reduce or control unwanted symptoms, but rather to develop psychological flexibility and freedom of thought to pursue values-driven, meaningful activity. And let me state that again. ACT is counterintuitively intuitive because it does not seek to reduce or even control unwanted symptoms, but rather to develop psychological flexibility and freedom of thought to pursue values-driven, meaningful activity. To tackle psychological flexibility, we first need to have a new way to look at pain. Pain has the ability to make us think we are the only ones feeling it. However, one of the most universal conditions facing every human who has ever lived, living currently, or who has yet to live, is the fact of experiencing pain and suffering. It is a trait that all of humanity shares, regardless of skin tone, culture, sexual preference, religious belief, mental or physical disability, national origin, age, creed, marital status, or political affiliation. It is a true multicultural group that everyone unfortunately belongs to. ACT's founder, Stephen C. Hayes, brings this experience into light and reveals it as a central tenet of the human condition when he says, "We all have pain. All human beings, if they live long enough, have felt or will feel the devastation of losing someone they love. Every single person has felt or will feel physical pain. Everyone has felt sadness, shame, anxiety, fear, and loss. We all have memories that are embarrassing, humiliating, or shameful. We all carry painful, hidden secrets. We tend to put on shiny, happy faces pretending that everything is okay and that life is all good. But it isn't, and it can't be. In fact, Hayes goes on to state that to feel pain and suffering is actually a requisite to being considered human. While death and taxes may be jokingly considered the only two unavoidable realities of life, ACT teaches that pain should also be included. However, the true destruction comes not from the pain itself, but the avoidance of pain and suffering. While it may seem very logical to avoid pain, the counterintuitive nature of ACT would rather state it is healthy to accept pain. The solution then would not be to rely on how much we can avoid inevitable pain, but to be willing to accept it as a universal condition of living as a human on this planet. This is the first step into a larger understanding of the value of being psychologically flexible, which is to be ready for inevitable pain and suffering. Now that we understand the true nature of pain, we need to explore happiness. And I want to explain that by telling you 4 fairy tales, but I'll warn you that none of them are funny or silly. Western culture, and indeed many psychological approaches, insist that the natural state of humanity is happiness. This is the first fairy tale, and it's responsible for the isolation many feel when they're unhappy. The second happiness fairy tale follows. When you don't feel happy, why, there must be something wrong with you, and this creates even more unhappiness. The assumption is that mental suffering is abnormal, but remember that to be human is to feel pain. The third happiness fairy tale is that in order to create a better life, we must get rid of negative feelings. But think about this. In your personal experiences, does not every meaningful relationship and project that you experience hold both joy and pain, love and disappointment, highs and lows? There is no perfect relationship, project, or thing. So when society tries to convince you that the way to happiness is to remove all the bad and only hold on to good, it's setting you up for inevitable despair and pain. The last fairy tale is that you should be able to control what you think and feel. This is where the ACT approach stands fully counterintuitive to most other psychological approaches and self-help schemes that teach controlling negative thoughts by fighting an internal battle and repeatedly focusing on positive thoughts instead. Unfortunately, this does not work in the long term at all, and only a little in the short term, if at all. At best, it is self-cheerleading, and that will require a lot of mental energy for little, if any, gain. And the same holds true for negative feelings. Most psychological approaches have at their core the stated goal of getting rid of negative symptoms. But ACT, on the other hand, teaches that control should not be the focus at all, nor should even be reducing the unhelpful thoughts and emotions, but to develop the psychological flexibility to accept them and choose not to fight the same losing battles. This reminds me of the classic 1980s movie War Games with the young Matthew Broderick when he taught the artificially intelligent computer to not start a nuclear war. In the end, the computer understands and says its famous line, "The only winning move is not to play." Battling unhelpful thoughts is the same way. The only winning move is not to play. The game is rigged, and we will lose every time we play. ACT seeks to make neutral roommates out of old enemies. In closing, as a Christian, I, not surprisingly, hold a Christian worldview. In my studies at Ohio Christian University, I realized that a lot of psychological approaches are very hostile to the Christian faith and indeed any religious belief at all. But I refuse to discard what I believe to be the ultimate source of truth found in the Bible in order to accept any psychological approach. And it was a breath of fresh air to discover that while ACT does not promote any religious affiliation, it is nevertheless quite compatible with a Christian worldview. I'm not expected to suspend my belief in God to pursue my counseling profession. When I found ACT, I found an explanation for the truth I had discovered, that by accepting the symptoms of my disorder and not fighting against it, I was much happier, and my symptoms resided almost completely as well. The same evidence-based ACT approach can be effectively applied to anyone struggling from unhelpful thoughts, which, as it turns out, is everyone on this planet. Thank you for your attention.